Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Bloom. I'm with Akamai. I'm a senior manager that runs our media and gaming professional services team. So my team works with major broadcasters from throughout the Americas, as well as publishers, ad agencies, social networks, game publishers, game studios, etc. What I'm going to talk about today is, why don't I switch over to that? There we go. So marketing came up with a great name for the talk today, which is, does your forecast call for clouds? What I want to give you a taste for is not an Akamai-centric view, but a cloud-centric view about how to design an OTT workflow based on your business requirements. What this is a taste of our methodology when working with our broadcasters to help them design the best type of cloud strategy for a particular OTT application. I mean OTT very broadly. It can mean traditional broadcast. It can certainly be digitally native OTT applications. But what I want to express is a bit of the design space for how to select the best cloud solution for a particular workflow. So I'll talk quickly about what that cloud looks like. I'll talk about the evolution of OTT online, and then set out some design criteria for selecting the best cloud solution. What I think has been interesting throughout these presentations is how many different iterations of a media workflow we've seen. This is a view that we use when consulting with our customers. We break up content into preparation and delivery, essentially. We've seen lots of chevron diagrams over the last couple of presentations, various iterations. But the idea is at a certain point, you're taking in content, you're doing something to it, and then doing other things to try to get it to the people trying to consume it. So let's look at another view of the same diagram, which is, I knew that using the templates was going to break the animation, but let's just roll with it. We'll just let this build out. So historically, media workflows were built around a data-centric model. I'm creating content, I'm going to process content myself, I'm going to store it myself, I'm going to find a way to distribute it, perhaps use a CDN, perhaps try to do it myself, I'm going to build the player myself, and then maybe have some hooks into other third parties to help with analytics, monetization, etc. Right now, the industry has progressed to a point where you can take pretty much any workflow and search and replace data center with cloud, and you will find an enterprise class solution out there. If this slide actually builds out, it's not going to work. Basically, you can take any of those components and any of those chevron diagrams and find a cloud solution that will scale and provide the reliability that you need to create a broadcast online. But what this has created is a very complex environment. How do you select which component you want to put into the cloud? What are the right components to keep inside your data center? What are the things that are important to emphasize and own and manage and operate versus the things that you're comfortable moving into a cloud provider and the benefits that that can provide? So there's three main workflow types. The first is DIY, build it yourself, roll your own, whatever you want to call it. This is the beginning of OTT, was all built in-house. I think that there's a perception in the marketplace that DIY can be unsophisticated. That's by no measure true. There are very sophisticated DIY workflows where some of the major publishers around the world are building a full end-to-end system in-house. But this is not, you may be integrating components from other technology providers, but fundamentally the solution is designed, built, and managed in-house by the publisher. Hybrid is probably the most prevalent solution, where a lot of the content preparation and storage and management is done in-house, and then there's a traditional delivery model using a content delivery network or other distribution platform. And then as the industry has progressed, we've finally reached a tipping point where there are fully cloud-enabled solutions. We've heard a lot about Azure and other plays in the cloud. Things like that are kind of the early comings of being able to run a full OTT workflow completely in the cloud without really having anything in the data center. So how do we work through these different options with our customers, and what are some of the key aspects that we talk about when working with a provider trying to decide the right way to architect a cloud solution. And as much as I can make this very Akamai-centric, I'm not going to talk about Akamai solutions. I'm going to talk about general cloud strategy here. A key driver and a key axis to make a decision around is the number of partnerships related to that type of content. Analytics, are you required by your business to provide third-party analytics? How is the business that is built around that content going to be able to get the intelligence it needs out of the application? What's the monetization strategy? Are you working with various advertisers? Do they have a solution that is cloud enabled, or do they require hooks to be built into the data center? And also syndication. What we see now is that there's kind of this move between content aggregators to content publishers wanting to retain the full application. And we're seeing a lot of relationships being built between publishers and distributors, and syndication is becoming more and more prevalent with general OTT applications, particularly on the broadcast scale. So what are your syndication partners? What are their requirements? Do they have technical requirements that your workflow needs to support? Device strategy. This is not optional anymore. Early on in OTT history, and I have a quick look back at some of the history of OTT at the end, devices were a nice to have. Now, and particularly in developing countries, devices are the primary means of consumption. What's fascinating is the biggest growth of OTT applications online are things that are happening during the business day. This year, it's an election year. I think this is the first election cycle where we've seen such a massive consumption of debates and town halls and news coverage online. And a lot of that is happening during the workday, particularly on the West Coast, because a lot of the debates are happening during business or after hours on the East Coast. But we're seeing a lot of folks that are at work with their iPad or iPhone or Android trying to consume that content. And that device strategy is critical if you're trying to attract the biggest audience possible. Risk is always going to be an influencer in your decision to make, to architect a particular solution. Where a particular approach falls on the risk factor depends on the type of risks companies are willing to accept. There's operational risk, there's technical risk, and frankly, there's business risk if you're trying to push the boundaries of what a particular solution might be able to accomplish. The overall business strategy, it's amazing how in the online broadcast landscape, that strategy has become more and more important. At the beginning, OTT was really a marketing exercise. Hey, it'd be cool if we could get this content online. Over time, it becomes more and more critical. And all of a sudden, we've seen this switch in the last 2 or 3 years where the online broadcasts are actually making significant amount of revenue and becoming a core part of the broadcasters' and publishers' business strategy. So all of a sudden, we have to start talking more rigorously about the business. How quickly do you need to go to market? What are you doing as far as monetization? And what do you expect as far as return on investment? When it's a marketing strategy, it's kind of expected to be a cost center. Now that OTT is a core part of publishers' business, that ROI is important, as well as considering the total cost of ownership. And we've seen that come back through a lot of the cloud presentations today is, what is the total cost of ownership for a given solution? And what is the long-term appetite for managing that cost? Of course, when we talk about any technical solution is, what are the capabilities in-house? Do you even have the technical expertise or the partners that are able to build the thing that you need? And if not, you're going to need to consider an outsourcing strategy. And if you do have that in-house capability, the other question is, what do you want that team focused on? Do you want them building the experience, or do you want them focused on pulling the technical pieces together? The answer, it varies depending on those capabilities and also the long-term vision for that publisher and what they're trying to do longer term. And this last one is critical, which is the projected growth of the application and the audience. We find that performance and the ability to scale an application is not a set it and forget it problem. You can't find a single solution, you can't build a technical solution online anymore that will grow and scale automatically. So those projected growth figures are the hardest thing right now for publishers to wrap their minds around. There's not a lot of good models out there for understanding audience growth, how your end users are going to consume your content, how they're going to adopt new viewing strategies, whether it's an app or a website. And there's a lot of missing pieces in those models right now. So that's our biggest challenge when we're consulting with our clients, is how to understand their growth and how to help them understand, reflecting on their own business, what they expect out of their application. Not this year, not next year, but 3, 5, 10 years down the line. So in these different strategies, there's a market perception I think I alluded to earlier, which is that you kind of evolve along a spectrum. You start building it on your own. You know, maybe you're doing a webinar or a press conference or an internal town hall, and you might be able to piece something together using kind of standard or free software, kind of build it yourself. And then over time, you're like, hey, this is really interesting content. My team's global now. I want to be able to scale it more effectively. They care about performance. I care about their productivity. So let's adopt a hybrid strategy. I'm going to prepare the content, but I'm going to trust someone else to distribute it for me. And then as you reach full broadcast scale, at a certain point, you move into the full cloud. I don't think that evolution is fair. I think that the reality of what we see, particularly amongst major broadcasters or enterprises, is a hybrid of hybrid approaches, where within a particular business, there are certain applications that make a lot of sense for DIY. If you're doing a town hall for your team, it doesn't make sense to have a full cloud strategy and do all the investment to bring in all those partners. So maybe that DIY approach makes a lot of sense. You may have a mix of lower value content that you just kind of want to outsource and see if you can kind of capture some value in that long tail, but you don't necessarily want to manage that. You don't have a particular tie to a set of technology. You really just want to offload it to someone, and you have this high value content. You just want to get it out there. So let's engage with a full cloud provider that can provide a full end-to-end solution. And of course, there's always the middle ground, the hybrid. And you'll see that a lot of those constraints that we talked about, those different axes influencing the business, influence ultimately the right strategy. You know, if you're comfortable with a standards-based solution, you don't have a particularly unique encryption scheme or some unique rights management or third-party integration, then a full cloud solution might work easiest for you. It's going to be standards-based, it's going to be spec compliant, it's going to work with the devices that you need, and it's also going to provide the maximum amount of scalability because you're not dependent on the capabilities of an individual data center anymore. The hybrid solution is probably the most common for major broadcast scale events online because of that last bullet point, which is they're the most flexible. A hybrid solution is going to allow you to move the needle, whether it's in the data center or in the cloud, most fluidly, and allow you to take the best advantage of the right components for your business. The reason why I say medium scalability there is that all of a sudden you're building in dependencies on a particular data center. There's lots of ways to mitigate that. Anyone in the technical or IT space knows about the challenges, but also that's a pretty well-defined process for building a scalable solution in a data center. But that is a challenge when you have a hybrid solution. And of course, the DIY, I think I've talked myself into a corner saying that it's typically lower complexity or fewer partners. I think the reality is that's on one scale, the DIY, and the other scale is massive complexity, massive partners, and needing to pull all that control back in-house so that you can build it from the ground up to your own needs. So I feel like there's this kind of like DIY 2.0, which is really enterprises bringing all those lessons from that evolution through the cloud back in-house, coming back full circle. So I want to close with a few numbers, and I know technical audience always likes to see graphs and figures. So I have 2 slides left, which I think illustrate the challenge ahead and also the incredible place we are in the industry right now. In the early history of Akamai, and I again apologize, I told you I wanted to speak too Akamai-centric, but in the early history of Akamai, one of the proof points of our technology and our platform and our approach that helped establish the CDN market for the industry was a Victoria's Secret fashion show in 1999. This was an event that was online that essentially broke the internet at the time. And when we look back at that, the amount of traffic is almost laughable. A gigabit per second. We have, there's single websites that easily push more volume than that right now, to the point where it's almost a rounding error when you look at traffic reports. At that point, online video is very much a novelty. In the early 2000s, all of a sudden it's becoming more common. The iPhone comes out, Android comes out, particularly with Obama's inauguration in 2009, where we saw the first terabit per second event on our platform. All of a sudden it's like, you know what, this is actually becoming significant. These are real numbers, this is a real audience. This is becoming an important part of a broadcaster strategy. So then, early 2010s, it's a core part of any broadcast experience, but it's a requirement, but it's not revenue generating. It's not an important part of the overall business. It's just you have to have it because the consumers are starting to expect it. And over time, we've seen the traffic on our platform and both on these broadcasts grow exponentially. Our average compounded annual growth rate for our platform is over 60%. And that's not in the last year, that's not in the last 2 years, that's our entire 20+ year history. So it's a phenomenal amount of growth and there's no slowdown. And now we've reached a point, particularly coming out of the last World Cup, where online broadcasts are mission critical. The last World Cup, we saw a single event peak over 7 terabits per second. That's on a single event. International audiences, that's starting to get pretty impressive in the amount of scale that's coming to these applications. Just to give another view, what's interesting about the media world is we talk about even years and odd years. Major sporting events, elections, et cetera, happen in even years in the States. So we can use those even years as sort of a benchmark for the evolution of the industry. In 2010, the South African World Cup, we saw match peaks around a terabit per second. And that was the first kind of really massive sports event that's showed this type of scale on an international level. 2010, we saw the London Olympics. What's interesting here is that you see a bit of a step down from the FIFA event 2 years prior. And the reason for that is, the Olympics are kind of a unique style of event. A lot of folks are watching on demand, et cetera. And then things really started taking off after 2014 during the Winter Olympics in Sochi. And the World Cup in 2014 blew out every record we had seen beforehand. Just look at the 4-year comparison between 2010 and 2014 at the World Cup. That's 7x the amount of traffic. 7x is a pretty significant amount of ramp up in only 4 years. We project that out, just straight math into 2018. Those are traffic levels that would crush the internet right now. And it's going to happen, and it's only a couple years away. So there's a phenomenal amount of growth here, and the challenge is building a solution that is going to allow you to scale as you need without taking off too much to chew at one time. So that's the end of my content. I hope that gave you a sense for how to help decide the best OTT strategy when it comes to the cloud, how to pick where you want to fall in that spectrum. And if you have any questions or have any interest in talking about this further, you have my email address. And before I open for questions, I just want to thank the ETC and Google for hosting this event.
Okay, well,
all right. Thank you,
Ben.
everybody.